Alright, so this is part 2, and I'm going to be going over the actual code itself. So start with the nodes, which are them big trees that you were seeing grow out of the ground. So with nodes, you can create, obviously it's a class, you create the new class with a position, config, auto regrow, drop in inventory, all that nice stuff. You see here, we're trying to get some runners. These are folders that store events for all of our runners over here inside the engine. It's more of a framework really, just to kind of make things a lot easier in the future. I've also massively overcomplicated it just for the purpose of this portfolio, to show that I am quite advanced at coding and I do know a lot of advanced mechanics. So let's start with growing. So right now it's very simple, the growing system, but I want to make a couple different ones that you can kind of configure in the config files here, and you can dictate if it grows in stages or if it grows gradually, like using tweening or anything. If you look here, it basically just checks if it's growing already or if it's fully grown. Obviously if it's fully grown, then it won't start growing again, and if it's growing already, then it's not going to restart this process. Set is grown to true, and you also set the health to the base health, because we change the health in damage. When it's damage, it gets destroyed. If it auto regrows, it sets the health straight away. If you have to call it to regrow manually, like in code somewhere, then it'll set the health once it's being called. It wraps it in a coroutine, just so it doesn't pause any other code. So this is technically asynchronous, as the grow time gets each stage's grow time just by dividing it, and then it does a while loop and goes through, waits for the specific stage grow time, and then it simply just spawns the stage here, which will create the part and move to. And then when you hit it with your axe, I'll quickly go over this. This is the axe swing function. So this is an attack, so each attack is going to have its own module. You get the player, you get the move, and you get the ID of the weapon that you're using. So yeah, and obviously we can have like multiple axes use this one move, technically, but I need to add a little bit more implementation for that. So yeah, the node gets destroyed. It simply uses the item runner to create an item. This drop.id is in here, so it drops wood. So the item runner will create a new item. And then it adds all the item IDs to this table, because you have to actually create an item and then add it to the inventory, because each item has its own ID, has its own special properties. So you can have like a piece of wood that's enchanted and it'll keep its special properties even when it's in stacks and stuff. Actually, it can be inside of a large item stack of 1,000 pieces of wood, and that one piece of wood that's enchanted will keep its properties, but it can still be a part of that stack. I'm still deciding if I'm going to have, if an item has special properties, make it not add to stacks. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there yet. Yeah, so it creates this item stack out of all the IDs, and then I haven't added this in yet because I've only really just made this change. It'll drop it at the player and just add 10 onto the Y, so it'll drop it above the player's head or something. So yeah, so now let's talk about runners. So there's an item runner and then there's an inventory runner. So we'll go over the item runner first. You create an item, you create a new item class. So the item class looks like this. New item ID, and it gets the base ID, which will be wood. Creates a new GUID for the item, finds the config and finds the model, which are all stored in folders here. So here's node config, but this is item models, and then item configs are stored on the server. I'm probably going to store node configs on the server as well, but I'm deciding, since obviously performance is going to be a big issue, since it's a big system and there's a lot of classes being made and used and all that stuff, I'm possibly going to change it in the future so that when trees are spawned in, all the rendering is done on the client, and it just puts a hitbox on the server for the sword to interact with, but all the actual tree rendering's done on the client. I feel like that'll be good for performance, but I'm still working on some kind of like optimization ideas in the next week or two, after I've created a couple more systems and frameworks for it, and then I'm going to work on optimizing it. So I'll probably upload the next optimized videos in like a week's time from this one. Anyways, it gets a spawn model, and parents it just to spawned items, which is here. So all the items are under spawned items unless they're in the world or equipped to a player. But when they're equipped to the player, they're still in spawned items, but it clones the model and puts it inside the player rather than just using the same model from spawned items. I'm probably going to change that as well. I just kind of added it as a little fix when I was getting some bugs and it ended up working. Next we've got the dropped event, which essentially just checks for a stack every time the item's dropped, and then when you drop an item it'll call that event. And then up here the check for stack. This is essentially like when you drop an item, it looks for other items around it to see if it can create a stack automatically, again for performance issues. This is broken at the moment. I'm not sure why. I need to figure out a fix for it. So like if you drop 2 wood and 2 wood right next to each other, they won't create a stack. So do need to look into that. This is just for special properties. This creates the proximity prompt. Obviously just adds the item from the inventory events to the player with the ID of the item. And yeah, you've got all this stuff. And then let's go back into the item runner now that I've showed you the actual item class. We've also got create item stack out of item IDs. The item stack is quite similar to the item class, but it's a little bit smaller. And it essentially can have like thousands of items in, but you can pick all of those items up from one single part. Performance again. Yeah, you can drop stacks in world, find item, find stack, find item config, and then there's also this run command. This is kind of my workaround because you can't send classes over events, fully at least. You can't send all the functions and stuff because they're all meta tables. You can't send them over events, so you essentially just call item runner run with the ID, the function you want to run, and then all the parameters, and it'll run it perfectly fine. It's a little bit of a workaround. So yeah, next I'll go through the inventory runner since this is kind of like the most, I guess, advanced thing. So we'll start at the top. So you create a new inventory runner. This is just a basic runner class. All the runner classes look like this. A runner, I'd like to, say that they're very advanced. They're not that advanced. They're essentially just a holder. So the inventory runner is a bit more advanced than the other ones. But if you look at the item runner, it's basically just stores the items in stacks all in a table where you can access it via functions. So it's more like, I guess, if you know APIs, it's like it's essentially an API endpoint, in a sense. And I guess I've unconsciously developed it like this because I work in C#, outside of Roblox as my job, so I'm used to kind of working in systems like this. I make websites, so I'm used to working with APIs, so this is kind of just the most comfortable way for me to make things now, I guess. Anyways, we've got inventory runner. So you create a new one, it gets all these events. These are all with the cross-network runner, so communicating server to client. So it just sets up all of these events when the inventory run is called, and then it sets up the return, which will run the function inside of the runner. We've got find. This just finds things in like the arm slots or the hand slots of the player, since it's all like, I don't know the name of the table, like type. I don't know the actual like terminology for it, but obviously there's dictionaries inside of dictionaries inside of dictionaries and stuff. And it also just sets up basic 40 slots in the user, and that's kind of like, because of the way the system works, whatever numbers here, that's the max amount of slots a user can have. Anyways, save player. I haven't done anything for this yet. I haven't really done saving, but it shouldn't be that hard. I'm basically just going to save this table as is, and then convert them all over to savable forms. So it'll just save the ID and all the properties, and then I'll add a function inside of the item class to kind of get from old, so it'll create a new item from an old item that's saved, if that makes sense. So you add an item in the inventory. The player, this is item, but it's the item ID. And then the slot you want to add it in, which is optional. If you don't select a slot to add it into, it'll just add it into the either closest empty spot, or it'll add it into a stack if a stack exists. So yeah, this is quite a small function. Just finds the config, gets the base ID of the model for actually finding things, finding the model so that it can put it into spawned items and stuff. And also we put the base ID in the entry so that you can, when you resend it over to the client, you already have the base ID. You don't have to make any more calls to the server, so you can just display it as wood rather than displaying it as its actual GUID. Base ID being the model that's in here. So yeah, you can add multiple items. So this basically just it's more. I made this so that I was having a performance issue when you were adding multiple items to the inventory. Like for example, adding 1,000 pieces of wood to the inventory when it dropped off the big tree. I made a workaround where you just make one call on the event to add all the item IDs rather than having to make 1,000 calls to the event. And then it'll just run this function itself rather than having to call this event inventory runner.add item inside the events folder 1,000 times. You just have to call this once and then it'll run that function, which is a lot more performant. Remove item. This is a little debug module I've been working on to kind of make the output a little less messy, but it didn't really solve the issue. Essentially, when you're removing an item, deleting it, it does all this stuff, trying to find the item in certain slots. If it finds it in these slots, then it'll do that. I also need to make it unequip if it's in the armor slots or the hand slots. So I'll add a quick comment for that actually. Next is drop item. This just you can drop a certain amount of a slot, so this is for stacks obviously, but if you try to drop like 5 wood when you only have 1, it'll only drop 1. Move item. This was a hard one to figure out, moving things into hands, moving things into armor from the slots and stuff, but I figured it out eventually. There's still a couple bugs to iron out, but yeah, I'll go through this a little bit slowly. If you want to pause and read, you can. And then there's equip, which just uses the weapon runner, and there should be an unequip somewhere that uses the weapon runner as well. Checks if player has item, gets the inventory. Now the weapon runner. So the weapon runner is essentially, this is the weld code. I need to remove some of these because I've only been working on this today. This is what welds it to the hand, and then this checks the setup of the player, just initiates the table with the player's user ID. And then you've got the unequip, which will just delete the weld, delete the part that the weld had, because it's just a clone, so you don't have to do loads of like parent stuff. You can just delete the part and delete the weld. And then you stop combos and revert camera. I haven't set up a camera system yet, but essentially when you equip, you see down here, it sets up the camera and it sets up combos. Combos are working currently, so this is for console, so you can do like XXB to do a certain special move rather than having to do like what other games do. It's you know, you can do XXB, it'll do that move. So that's all working. I need to change the delay times though, because it's a bit like sometimes it won't register and stuff. And I need to set up a camera, obviously to look over the player and have like camera effects when you're attacking and stuff like that. But yeah, so this essentially just creates a weld, sets up the combos to listen for when you do a certain combo, and when you do a certain combo, it'll swing the axe. Yeah, and it'll set up the combos for that specific item, so it'll look for that item's moves down here in the moves folder, and then set up a combo for that. And set up combo here, simply goes through config and .moves. So if we go into the axe config, for example, you've got moves and the combo is just mouse button 1. But I could also make this combo XCX, for example, and it would also run that thing. To do that, like let's say mouse button 1, mouse button 1. So you have to double click to attack. I'll test that in a second after I've done this. And then stop combos just stops listening for these combos, and then obviously the camera's not doing anything. Run move just actually makes the move happen. It makes you swing your sword. So let's see if this actually works. As I said, it does. It should, but I actually haven't tested it, so we'll see. So we need double click to attack instead of single click. So if I go over here and pick up this axe and equip it, if I click once, oh, okay, so it's not working. But if I click twice, it works as well. But if I do like click an X, for example, it won't do anything because that's recognizing that I'm trying to do a combo. I'm going to do a little workaround for that, where if you do like mouse button 1 and then try to do a combo with it, and that combo is incorrect, then it'll just do a normal attack or something along the lines of that. I need to kind of plan that out on paper. But yeah, anyways, axe swing. Very simple. It uses this module I made like 3 years ago called Basic Raycast, which essentially just uses a raycast as a hitbox for your sword based off 2 attachments. It creates the raycast while you're swinging, and it'll attack anything. Like, it'll do damage to things. So if we go back into the axe swing, you'll see it does this ray cast, ray start, and then it just checks every time a ray is hit from this basic ray cast. So it'll create like a ray every second. So while you're swinging, it's creating loads of rays. Anything that they hit calls this function, and then bit of debug here. But it'll print can hit local model, and then it'll find the humanoid. If it finds a humanoid, it'll find the player. If it finds a player, it'll take damage to that humanoid based on the base damage and the damage multiplier of this move. So for example, we can have a big swing that you have to have a bigger cooldown for, but it'll do 2 times damage or something. And then else, if it doesn't find a humanoid, it's looking for a node, so it can damage the node. If it does, then it just goes to the node runner, damage node, fire, node ID, player, and then the damage. So it is actually quite good that I've set this framework up, I'd say, because I can do things like this in one line to damage the node just by firing an event. So yeah, I think it's quite cool. Next, I'll show you the actual combo recognizer. So the input runner on the server is just this simple thing. It just listens for combos that gets sent over from the client. But if we go to the input runner on the client, obviously the client has its own framework. It's quite basic compared to the one above, but obviously it's got other modules I made like 3 years ago, like a dragger to drag UI items in the inventory, and a pop-up that I'm pretty sure I made this recently, the pop-up, the dragger I made 3 years ago, that just creates a pop-up at the mouse and then returns events that you can use to see if an action is called from the pop-up. But anyways, input runner on the client we're looking for here. So it essentially does a lot of really complicated code that I wrote 2 days ago and have already forgotten what any of it does. I need to start adding comments to code that I make. But it essentially just checks for inputs constantly, and then it's got an input chain that's outside of this input began function, so it'll just add inputs to the chain, and then it does this every time you do an input. It waits 0.2 seconds, and then it checks if you've done a second input after this one. So obviously if you do mouse button 1 then mouse button 1, it'll call this function twice. So this one essentially just checks that the chain hasn't changed from your last input, and if the chain has changed, then it'll not do anything at all. And if it hasn't changed, then it'll say that, okay, well, you're done with your combo, you've stopped inputting for 0.2 seconds, which sends the combo off to the server. And then also this on combo event for the client to use also, so the client can also use combos. We can see that in use in the inventory. If you go into .new, it listens for the combo of just a single M, and if it finds that, then it opens the inventory or closes the inventory, depending on what state it's currently in. So that's it actually working in practice. But yeah, that's like the basics of it. One more thing is, so down here, these lines of code is what spawns both of the nodes in here. So this spawns both the nodes in, very simple 2 lines. You create the node and you start growing it. A stack, you have to create it with multiple IDs, so that's the IDs of like 3 pieces of wood, and then we've dropped 1 piece of wood just in the world. But yeah, the IDs are 3 pieces of wood, and it'll just create this stack, and then you can just call drop stack in world, simple as that. Create an item like that, and you call drop at position or drop at player. So yeah, although the framework is massively overcomplicated and everything, it is actually, I'd say, better in the long run once it's optimized and it's working with like little to no lag, even on thousands of items. Even though I know that there's never going to be thousands of items in the game at once, I'd rather the system be able to support something that's never going to happen. You know, so I'm going to optimize it. I want it to work with like I'd say 5,000 items at once being spawned in, like instantaneously, an item stack of 5,000 items, for example, and I want it to do that with like 0 millisecond lag, like 0 lag at all, which I'm not really that far off. Right now it's like 1 second, 2 second. I feel like if I do a couple little things to kind of call less events and call less functions, then I can make it work in like 50 milliseconds maybe, and then I've just got to iron it down after that. But in the long run, this is going to be better off, I think. It's going to be a lot easier to make updates and stuff. Like if I wanted to make a new item, for example, all I'd do is put the item inside of this MISC folder. That's the model. And then I'd create a new item config like that. Like just duplicate that, for example, change the model and change all the values and stuff, and that's a new item created, like as simple as that. And then if you want to add a move for it, then you just set it to can hold as true, and then it'll check. You set it can hold as true, and then you also add this moves table in with the name of the move, the combo, the damage multiplier, the animation, and it'll just set up the move like that. You add a move thing here, do a little bit of code, which I'm also looking at making like something so that this can all be ironed down as well. Make it really easy to make moves. But yeah, it's quite simple. I'd say it's quite advanced. It's taken me like I think 7-8 days maybe to do the brunt of it. And I'm hoping that the game will pay off in the future. But yeah, that is everything to show at the moment, and when it's optimized I will do a second video to show the optimized version of it.